And I will go ahead and introduce our session. Today's presentation is OER, the beginning of the journey in higher education. And we have a wonderful panel with us today. These are fabulous folks, Dr. Jill Tussey, Michelle Metzger, Amy Clark, and Jacqueline Swink, I believe all from Buena Vista University here in Iowa. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
All right. Thanks, Rebecca. I'm going to go ahead and screen share. So, we started this journey, as a group at the beginning of the academic school year. So we are by no means experts yet, but we're just, kind of wanting to share like our process. So anybody that, is new to this, they can kind of be like, oh, okay, this is what their journey went. And so we have a couple different takes on, our journey, our path, what we're looking for. So we'll go ahead and share that. As Rebecca said, I am Dr. Jill Tussey. I am the division chair over literacy, early childhood, and TESOL at Buena Vista. So go Beavers. Our cute little mascot there, but looking very fierce for our presentation. So I will let Amy introduce herself.
My name's Amy Clark. I'm a part-time instructor of special education with Buena Vista University and an early childhood specialist. My background is early childhood and a lifetime special educator.
All right, Michelle, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Michelle Metzger, and I am assistant professor of math and STEM education at Buena Vista University.
All right, and Jacqueline can wrap us up.
I am Jacqueline Swink. I am a part-time professor at Buena Vista University, and I have been in education for over 30 years and I've taught a variety of classes. So we'd like to welcome each of you to our session this afternoon.
Right. So Jacqueline and I've actually been with Buena Vista for, oh my gosh, probably at least 8 to 10 years now. So 7. Okay. So we're 7. So it just seems longer with everything, those jobs. So, we've gone through a lot of, textbook and adoption, different things like that. So, we really, our group, we have lots of different backgrounds, and currently we're teaching, different areas. So we do have a wide variety, and I think that will help, share a little bit of different things that we have going on. So, when we always, start something, we have to think, what is the reason why? Like, what's that, solid foundation in anything? And visuals, as I taught second grade for 12 years before I moved into higher ed. So I think that visuals are so important so that we, you can see the big picture. You can see when you think about OER, like all the things that, these keywords, these terms that really stand out. And these are all really, it's simple. It's just a statement. It's just a word, vocabulary, but we can see how it weaves together and all of the benefits, all of the different components of OER and how helpful they are. And if you look, one of the bigger ones that, the size really matters, students. So we are really, focusing on, this journey. So how we can help our students, how we can provide them with a better experience and thinking about their needs. So since Jacqueline and I are both in the literacy department, I am kind of going to think, talk and share about it as the big picture is at the division level. So, for me, the big takeaways with OER, so it can help students, with the cost. We, that, it's all over the news all the time about how expensive college is. And then when you add, lots of different textbooks in, things like that, we really want to be cognizant about how much money that our students are spending. And then we attended a presentation in January, and one of the statements that he said, we often allow our students like, oh, you can get the digital copy of the book. It's, thinking that that's helpful because often it's a little bit cheaper, but then they have nothing to return. So, if they rent it, they can return the text and get it back. If they buy it, Jacqueline was sharing about helping her college son get everything sent back, so you can get some money. Well, if we have the digital version, they don't have that option of the text. With OER, it's different because it's a resource that comes without that fee, without that extra step. We know how busy things can get, and like getting to the post office or the UPS is like, yikes, one more thing. Also, they undergo reviews. So, it's something that's been vetted. We're not just, trying to pick the first thing that we find and go ahead and share that. And then the final thing that I thought was really interesting, as we're working with pre-service teachers, we are allowing them opportunities to be published. So even at that undergrad level, before they're in the classroom, they can, if they really are interested in writing, and we know the same as we tell, our students in elementary, middle school, high school, reading and writing go together so well and support each other. So even at that college level, you want to be a better writing teacher, then you should be writing. And so that gives that platform of where they can go ahead and they can be published. So some of the thoughts and challenges that I just always think about for my team, I know, everything in education is super busy. So thinking about the big picture, we have 8-week courses. When I started, we had some courses that had 7 books. So you have 7 books and 8 weeks. Like, is this something that's actually manageable? So cutting down that, looking for resources that are free. How can we fit OER into our 8-week model? When we're doing our course revisions, we're looking at that textbook cost. We are making sure that we are not just, finding something that's outdated. We want to make sure it's current. We want to look at the price. With OER, then it takes off that step of looking at the price. We have, since everybody is enjoying this global pandemic still, we know that Amazon Prime doesn't always get it here in 2 days. And so now just the shipping has really been, delayed. And so our students aren't always having their resources and their materials by the time class starts. If we could use something, embed the OER into our courses, then it's the resources there. We're not waiting for them to, go ahead and like, oh, I don't have my book the first week of class. Like, nope, it's already in there. The last thing is time, time to find the resources in the OER, in that realm. It's the same as if you're looking for new textbooks, but just be mindful as the chair about all of the different things that my part-time faculty already have going on and adding one more thing. So these are kind of things that, as a chair, I think about a lot with the process of, changing, developing, finding quality resources. And the final thing, we all have published either chapters or articles, and, we're familiar with that process, with Springer, with IGI, different companies like that, and thinking, as professionals, like, how is that going to shift for us? Like, what will it look like if we, were to, instead of publishing, go to an OER and publish with them? So these are just conversations as like the division chair that we're at the early stage. Like I said, we all just started this journey in August with Rebecca. So it's been interesting, but these are, just things that we're thinking and, working through. So I will hand it off to Miss Amy.
So I was hired at BVU specifically to teach an early childhood special education endorsement. And part of that is creating courses and updating courses to make sure that they are very current. And so this OER process was really interesting to me. I spent the last year looking for a text for one specific course, and I have 3 courses I need to find text for, and I need to keep them current. And so just to reiterate some of the things that Jill has already said, OER supports equity, and that's a big conversation in education right now. Who has access to what? And so just knowing that the students I teach would have access to that information. A million years ago when I was in undergrad, a friend of mine and my dad had just been downsized from middle management, and her dad had just had a heart attack, and we took all the same courses our freshman year of college so we could share texts. And so this was before we really had constant access to computers or internet. But the thought that students that I teach wouldn't have to experience something like that, they would have access to free materials and current materials. Really onboarding, getting people, helping the rest of our division understand the importance of using these kinds of materials. Just walking through this process with Rebecca. When we started, it was clear as mud, and we were all like, oh my gosh, what have we gotten into? How do we do this? Just the one website she gave us is so big and overwhelming. But having the opportunity to be guided through the process was a really important step, so that we had clarification. We were able to take time to develop our understanding. Not that we're anywhere near where we need to be, but we feel much more confident about sifting through materials and finding good materials. And so being a part of that process for our colleagues would be important as well, kind of paying it forward from where Rebecca brought us. And then just what Jill has already said about the textbook delays. Since the pandemic, we have seen delays like no other. And, requests, can you scan this chapter to me? Can you? Well, not really, not legally, I can't. But also understanding that our students are remote learners and we can't support them. They can't come to my office and I can't hand them a textbook because we might live, 3 hours apart. So just to assist with some of those complications in online learning. Online learning is so fabulous. It makes learning more accessible, but then there's just these little challenges that the OER seems like would help to alleviate. So specifically in early childhood, there's some issues. Number one, I feel strongly that our first 5 years of life, we do our greatest growth and development. And so it's critical that training teachers have access to the most current information in child development and specifically in intervention, so that we can close the gap between children with disabilities and their same age peers. When I moved to my position as an early childhood specialist, I had opportunities for education and training that I had not had when I was in the teaching field, when I was on the ground in the classroom working with these young children. And I was astounded at, for example, the research out there on autism that wasn't trickling down into the public schools to me. So that just in the short time that I have switched from classroom teaching to early intervention, I got a 2-year training in identifying early red flags for autism, so that when my own grandson was 3 months old, I said to my daughter, "Oh, hey, honey, hey, I'm seeing some red flags, and here's some current outcomes-based interventions that we can implement." And now he's going on 3, and he's quirky and fun and smart and talking, which is really critical with autism specifically. And what is really exciting about OER is that authors are publishing information that's very current. And when we are teaching these courses, when we are working on such critical skills as early intervention, I want these teachers to go into the field with the most current information. And this appears to be a really valuable and inexpensive way to disseminate that information to teachers. The same is true, oh my word, in our field. One of our biggest challenges is challenging behaviors in the classroom, and that's education-wide. Teachers get really freaked out by children with challenging behaviors. And when I was in the classroom, I went out of my way to email universities with PhD programs that were working with children with challenges. But not every teacher has time or energy to do that. And OER, what I discovered when I started doing my search is that there's lots published from valuable sources of people who are working with challenging behaviors, and specifically the long-term effects of early trauma. And so already I have one textbook that I am going to embed in one of the courses that I teach that's specifically on curriculum and challenging behaviors, because it's such a critical piece of education at this age. And there's already strategies out there. It's already written, it's already in place, and I can embed those in courses that are going to affect teachers in the next few years, which is really exciting to me. Yeah.
All right, and we are going to move on. So we've talked about our division, early childhood. We are going to move on to math. So I'll let our resident expert, Michelle, take over for us.
Hello, my name is Michelle. I have been in this field of education for quite a few years. I started my journey as an elementary teacher, moved to the middle school, moved to the high school, moved to the college level, adjunct work, now full-time assistant professor work. But one of the things that I always did in my beginnings is that I always knew there had to be a quest for more. There had to be something better. There had to be something that I was continuing to look for as I was growing in my mathematical understanding, not just for me, but for my future students and how they think about math. So when I dove into this, looking at this OER type stuff, and I had kind of played in this area a little while earlier, probably about 2 or 3 years ago, because one of the courses on my class, Jill, can you go back a second? Thanks. One of the courses in my class, I was teaching students that were struggling with mathematical understanding. And so at that point in time, OER was maybe a little bit more new than what it is now. And I knew that those students weren't going to buy the textbook because they weren't going to keep it even if they did buy it. And if they did buy it, it wasn't going to be worth their time or effort to really look at it because they wanted to get to the answer, and that's all they really wanted. So at that point in time, I decided that I was going to use 3 different books and interface them all together and see what that looked like. So that turned out to be quite a good adventure, but yet it turned out to be quite a big undertaking. So as I fast forward a few more years, and I begin this process this academic year, looking for other books that are out there, because new books have come along and new things have been updated and new areas of focus are out there, I began to look for methods of books that happen to help teachers understand how to teach. And so I began, Jill, can you advance? Perfect. So I began to look for this teaching of mathematics at the secondary level, one of the courses that I had to be teaching this fall and now this spring. And so I thought, oh, great, teaching mathematics, secondary, this would be perfect. I should be able to look at this book and see what's going on, and it should fit well to what I need to teach my future teachers. But then I began to look at the beginning, and it talked about like key stage 3 and all these abstract things, key stage 4, and I'm like, what is this? So as I began to go farther, I looked farther along. Next slide, please. And I thought, well, this should tell me a lot about what's going on. Yeah, this was not what I wanted, because this was the national curriculum for people in England, not for people in the United States, and which meant I didn't understand what it meant to say key stage 3 or key stage 4, and it wasn't a manual about how to teach. And so I decided that that wasn't going to be something that I was looking for, and it was really only one of the textbooks that were out there in the OER world currently that talks about secondary mathematics. And so I began searching. So as I began searching, I looked to see once what was out there. I knew that math doesn't change a lot, but yet my focus had to change so I could better pick a textbook in which I was going to potentially use with students. So not any or each or every textbook has exactly the same thing that you want, written word for word, described in every way, shape, or form that you would like. And so my focus became, what does it have? What's the good in it that I can use? And what am I going to have to supplement? No matter what book I pick, I'm going to have to supplement some way, some shape, some form, because I always have to do that. Because the textbook doesn't give me everything. It gives me a guide, but not the total look at everything. So fast forwarding, deciding, come up with some kind of a book. And so I decided that I would look at this pre-algebra book. So again, the focus was a group of students that are struggling with learning mathematics, coming to campus, maybe not quite as strong as they needed to be in their mathematical world, but yet having these big holes in their overall understanding from early ages to middle school ages to high school ages, and now they're trying to get through college, and math being the big gatekeeper in all the types of careers that are happening. So what piqued my interest about this book, not the text, not the title, but the last part of the sentence where it says it addresses the needs of students with diverse backgrounds and learning styles. So I knew that everyone doesn't think like I do. So I need to find books that would put all these pieces together and how it would fit. So Jill had talked about modeling. And as you begin to think about modeling, next slide, please. As you begin to think about modeling, I needed to have students to begin to think about what does it look like, base 10 modeling, to do subtraction. And so this particular textbook, when I was looking at that, it took the 43 and made it into base 10 blocks. It eventually took the 26 and made it into 10s and 1s, because you knew you couldn't, back up a second, please, because you knew that you couldn't ungroup to regroup, so that's new language. We used to say carry and borrow. And so that's what students are coming with. And so we kind of have to give them this nuts and bolts visual model idea so that it makes more sense. So now you can really subtract, keep going. And so then once they were able to subtract, we were able to now make connections as to 43 minus 26 really does get you to 17. And how does that look? So that was one of the big things that I really wanted to see in a textbook is, do they have models? Some students have to hold the math in their hands before they can hold it in their head. And with that information and knowledge, I liked the beginning of what this book had. The next thing that it had, if you click ahead, it had these media type of areas in all of the lessons that happened to be included. And so these three that you would see on this particular slide went to one website. It's called Math is Power for You. And so what it does, this particular website, and I like this group and how they put this together, they start with very young, so second grade, potentially third grade, and they do courses and content all the way through college courses. And so they've built all these different ideas and all these different videos, multiple ways in which to show the interactions between how I understand the math, how I need to understand the math to get to where I need to be. And so those three videos, just for this one, adding and subtracting of numbers, was really kind of a key thing for me. So the next thing this textbook had was, so again, I'm searching for these big, powerful things, is this self-check stuff. So after we got done, I would be able to ask the students to put an X in the box of where they felt the most comfortable, to give me just a slight bit of knowledge about what they knew versus what they didn't know versus what they felt they could move forward with and what they felt they still struggled with. So once you look at all these other kind of ideas and the ways in which the math comes together, everyone and their brother doesn't like the word fractions, or there's very few of them that like the word fractions. So give me the next slide, please. So this brought me to the big villains of PJ. Oh, go back, please. This brought me to the big villains of PJ Masks. For those of you that are in the elementary young kid world, these are the big villains. And so you've got Luna Girl, you've got Romeo, and you've got the Night Ninja. And these are the big evils that the three PJ Masks superheroes are trying to conquer. So fraction being the big evil, I wanted to see what was in there. So next slide. So I was hoping when we got to fractions, I would see something meaningful in the way in which they began to understand fractions. How do you partition fractions? What do fractions look like? How many is in the whole? You can kind of see, but maybe not directly see in this particular picture. They cut this pizza in 12 pieces. So each piece is 1/12 of a size of the entire pizza. So you can see potentially 1/12 written inside there. And so I like the way in which they talked about the meaning of the fraction and what it looks like when you divide it. As they moved on in the next slide, you're going to see that there happen to be whole numbers and that there happen to be, next slide. Next slide. There we go. You see an amount of a whole, and then you see a partition of some that's left over. And so you're looking at improper fractions. How does that look? How many parts are in the whole? Well, there's 8. You've got 3 extra that you have to use. So this is actually equivalent to 1 complete whole and 3/8 that go with it. Students need those pieces in order to comprehend what that looks like. All we tell them is, go ahead, Joe, next one. All we tell them is, look, all you need to do is find a common denominator if you're looking between 1/3 and 2/3 and how to 1/3, and 1/2. And how those look together. Just multiply by 2, multiply by 3, you're going to get your answer and everything's going to be great. Well, that's just a procedure that they're multiplying. They're trying to remember something. It doesn't always work that way. And so this particular textbook, what was really nice is it showed how like a half became fourths, and how 1/3 and fourths didn't go together. Down a little bit further on this slide, you see a half with, what is the half with fifths. And so it doesn't quite work with fifths, either 1/2 or 1/3, because the pieces are too large. And as you continue to go, eventually, next slide, as you continue to go, they eventually work through this idea of, oh, they have 6, which are exactly the same. So a half is the same as 3 6, we call that equivalent. And you know that a third is the same as 2 6. So now, since they are kind of in the same ballpark, you can eventually put those together and come up with your answer. But seeing, can you back up just one slide? But seeing in their mind why it's important that pieces have to fit together, not just for a half or not just for a third, but collectively. So go two slides forward, please. And so how those things happen to advance was really critical for me. This holding things in their hands before they could put it in their heads is something that even we go back to when you become, I'll say, an older student. It's okay to use manipulatives. This particular textbook had a lot to do with manipulatives, and I wanted students to be able to use the ones that we have hands-on manipulatives. I have a collection of online manipulatives that I go to where I help students see that moving the parts around and solving equations using manipulatives, how you keep balanced parts on the sides of equations. What does that all look like? Sometimes we happen to move quickly through those, and there's pieces that get lost along the way. A couple other things that this textbook had that was important to me is it talked about everyday math. A lot of times students will be like, well, I can, back up please. People can do math. Can you go back to the previous slide? Thanks. Okay, so a lot of time people can do everyday math kind of things, but they don't see it translate to what the real world is. And every time we walk, move, go to a store, make something in the kitchen, there's always some kind of a math content that has to happen. This particular one deals with baking and decorating things on their sofa. And so what does that look like? How many yards do you need for the pillow, and how many, what are we making, chocolate chip cookies in the second one? In terms of the way that that looks. The other thing that I liked about this particular textbook is that it happened to include writing exercise. Explain why you need a common denominator. What good does that help you with? Why are there two fractions that you need to compare? How is that helpful for everything that you need to do? And how does that get you closer to the answer? Math is more than just answers. Math is problem solving. Math is figuring out different ways to address things. And if they're never ever thrown into that ring of understanding, then they're always pushed out in the back and they think, I only have to worry about the answer. I stop thinking when I get it, so I don't have to worry about it anymore as long as I get the right answer. I don't need to share, understand what that looks like. That's next slide. And so things that I look for when I look for this OER stuff, yeah, it's kind of settled on a textbook. I know it's not $1 million, but yet it's a lot of content that I can use, but I always have to supplement. I like the video things that are included and embedded. I like the modeling that goes with it. I like the way in which it simplifies the work from the beginning of how they would understand it through to where they are now. I like the way in which they have to write about certain mathematical topics and ideas. And I also like the enrichment that comes from it. If I can ask myself questions of, do I understand this? If I don't, how much do I understand? I know I've made a difference in the way in which I'm beginning to understand this idea of math. And this book, OER book in general, will help me get to that process. All right, Amy, I'll let you take over then and continue on.
All right. Well, we're moving to Jacqueline. So,
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. And thank you, Michelle, for sharing. So as I mentioned, my name is Jacqueline. I've been in education for over 30 years. And when I was asked if I wanted to learn more about OER, I knew this was a topic of interest for me. So that's what I want to share with you. One, I'm a college professor. So my concerns were the number of textbooks we were using in a classroom, as well as the total cost. But my other concern, and I teach school, so now you're going to hear announcements. So give me 1 second. I'm going to mute.
We just like to make sure that we have props to bring in. You know, if she needs more, I'll grab my little palm, show him, and,
Okay.
you know, we'll just make it a whole thing.
I apologize.
Not every presentation can include a dog and announcements. Gold star for us.
We are well-rounded here. So as I mentioned, I was a college professor, but I'm also a mom of 2 boys that were in college years ago. My children are 3 years apart. So I witnessed the rising cost of textbooks firsthand. And as Jill's going to show you on the next screen, textbooks are a big business. You can see that they have raised over 800% in the last 30 years. That is a huge increase. So as a mom of 2 former college students, I recall purchasing every book on that class list when my older son brought that list home. I was a newbie out there. I quickly learned that there were other venues besides just that college bookstore. Bigword.com, that was my best friend. I purchased the books there, I sold them back. What I was finding is I'm only getting about 0.25% back when we sold them back. So I became frustrated early on. I was frustrated for a couple of reasons. One, my children were buying textbooks and they weren't being used in the classroom. 2, my children were not necessarily opening those textbooks and still passing those classes with an A. So when my youngest came into play, I was the mom that said, reach out to those professors. And I want you to ask 2 questions. I want you to say, are you really going to use this textbook in the classroom? And if so, do you have an extra copy of that textbook? As Jill's going to show you on the next slide, I want you to look at this. On average, look at the cost. 5.8 textbooks are purchased each semester. That's a cost of about $488. And we know that that's a pretty low cost because as a mom, I recall some of my children 10 years ago buying textbooks at over $100 each. So I really feel that that $488 a semester is very, very low. Overall, when I did a little bit of research, I came up with approximately $1,000 a year. So when you look at that picture on the left, I took that picture for a reason. I taught 3 college classes. As Jill said, we've been with Buena Vista about 7 years. Many times years, it seems like more than 7 years. But that is my very first picture. I taught 3 8-week classes, and those are all the books. One of the classes had 5 books in the class. As a professor, I felt I needed to teach all 5 of those books because I asked the students to purchase them. So this is the entire reason why I wanted to learn more about OER, about the open education responses. I wanted to learn about it as a parent and as a professor. And I know that there are a lot of benefits. So on that next slide, I want to talk about some of the benefits. If we look at this, the first one I listed is multiple strategies. If we only have 1 textbook, now granted I had more than 1 in some of the classes, but we know that there are college classes out there with 1 textbook. That gives 1 perspective, and that's that author's perspective. If we look at OER, we have multiple perspectives as well as multiple strategies. Remember, if a class is only requiring 1 textbook, then the students are only getting 1 point of view. Using OER is going to open up that playing field to all those perspectives, as well as a variety of formats. Accessibility. Jill mentioned a little bit about purchasing due to the pandemic. Not as easy to get books in a one-day turnaround. Students no longer have to purchase some materials online, go to a bookstore, or we've even seen a lot of students that are borrowing from friends due to those high costs. So the cost effectiveness comes into play, and we've mentioned that. And then I added the collaboration piece because I firmly feel that with OER, you are, as a professor, you are going to collaborate, not just in the writing, but in reviewing those. You're not just going to necessarily pick this resource just for your class. I feel that it's going to open that collaboration field. As professors, we collaborate now with others, but I feel with OER, I feel that it's a great idea. But I also do want to talk about, we don't want to just eliminate textbooks. So if you look at the next slide, I have a picture of 2 books. And I selected these 2 books because these are best practice books. These books contain strategies that students will need to use not just in their classroom in college, but also their future classrooms. I want each of you to think when you were in college, you probably kept some of those textbooks. I'm not saying OER is not a great idea. I think it's a fantastic idea, but I think that we need to also be cognizant of the books that are out there. Yes, some content definitely needs to be changed. We can't keep on using the same textbooks year after year because of the ever-changing world that we're living in. But there are some strategies. I've been in education for 30 years. There are strategies that I learned in college that I'm still using today. The only difference is we seem to change the name. There are great textbooks out there. So I don't want us to be closed-minded and think we just need to move to OER. Yes, there are a lot of benefits to OER, but I think that it needs to be a mix of, if this is a great strategy and this is a great book, why are we getting rid of it? We need to keep it. So the 2 books that you see on the screen are books that my students purchased in one of my classes years ago. I teach in a school district in Southeast Iowa. Both of these books are books that we have now purchased for the literacy department, and we have distributed them K-8 for many of the teachers. They're great textbooks. So please keep that in mind. How do we make that decision? On the next slide, I put 3 questions up, and I want everyone that is participating in today's session to think of these 3 questions. What's best for your students? What's best for your college? And what is best for your program? All programs are different. You've heard from each of us, from the literacy, special education, to math. How does OER fit in? And I know Jill is going to wrap things up with us, but it's not necessarily an individual decision. I feel that you really need to ask those 3 questions when you're deciding. You want to look at your students, you want to look at your college overall and have those discussions. And then as a college, talk about it in departments. How does this work in the nursing field? We still might need some textbooks. We're looking at some medical terms. Some of that's not changed. In the area of education, yeah, there's some great resources out there and some great references. So you need to ask yourself, how can OER fit? So I challenge each of you, if you are new, like we are at Buena Vista University, it's an area that we know there's a need. We know there's a rising cost. We want to do everything we can to encourage students to go to college, to continue in our classes, but also help them with that financial aspect. And OER is there. But don't think of it just as the financial aspect. Think of it as How can we help? What new material can we bring in? And that collaboration piece. So I know Jill is going to close our session, and I know we're really short on time, and I apologize. We have about 4 minutes left. So we do want to give you an opportunity to ask us questions.
Right. So, we've talked about, and like I said earlier, I'm all about like those visuals, the quick things that we can look at and we can see. And if you look at, the visual on the left, this is what OER can do. It can eliminate that cost. It can eliminate the stress of not having your textbook when class starts. And, it seems like it's very stressful for the instructor. I assume it's stressful for the students, but it's definitely stressful for us because, do you extend due dates? Do you try to like help them, find these things? So it really shows like it's taking away some of those barriers that, we may not see that the students have, and they're all coming to us at different levels, but it can really be helpful to provide that common platform for everyone. So we have, just 3 minutes. I would be careful what questions you ask because we're very beginning of the journey. So Rebecca's on here. We may be like volleying the questions to her to answer. But if anybody, has any questions or just wants to share final thoughts about their experience, we have a couple minutes. And so the floor is open.
Yeah, feel free to put your question or comment in the chat, or if you want, just unmute yourself and feel free to ask. So I actually have a question that maybe I'll start with, unless anybody else does. Leave folks a few minutes to think. So I'm curious on what each of you, where are you at as far as your excitement? What's the thing about OER that has you excited going forward, if anything?
For sure, with me, it is the course is ready to go. The book is there. They're not, because it's term after term. It's always that scramble of what can we do? And you want to start the term off, ready to go, really smooth. And we do 8-week terms. It's really fast paced. If you don't have the book the first week, that's one thing. If you don't have the book the second week, like we're getting into that problem area of where it's going to be hard to catch up. And then when you're scrambling, you're not doing that deep learning. So I'm most excited about the cost obviously is great, decreasing that, but more than anything is you are ready to go week 1. That deep learning can start that first week of class. It eliminates that excuse of, because, perhaps the reason it's late is because I didn't order it till the day the term started, but it eliminates that, that stress. It eliminates that excuse, that reason that can just kind of erode that deep learning the first week.
Rebecca, I'm going to jump in. I feel that the students are going to be excited about that, as Jill mentioned. The other thing is, students get a book, and the first thing they do is see how many chapters are in it. They look and see how thick the book is. So with OER, it's snippets. We're picking sections of books or sometimes articles. And for a student, that's much more manageable than looking at a book that has 25 chapters and they're overwhelmed thinking, do I really have to read all these? So I'm excited for that part of it. And I feel that we're helping that student with a little anxiety.
I'm excited about the fact that you can now more easily cut and paste books and stick them together to make a book. Whereas before, when I began this, it was like, okay, here, go to this book this day. This is what you're doing. Okay, now it's Friday. You're going to go to this book and go here and get these problems from there. And so it was really a lot of back and forth between lots of different places. And now we can cut, paste, put it all together, and here's our book. So I like the making it what would be ours.
Very nice. Anyone from the participation group have any questions? I don't want to hog all the time. We've got just a couple minutes left.
I would be curious with our audience, is anyone currently using this in their classes, or are you just here to learn and see what it's all about?
Good question. Feel free to jump on the chat or unmute.
Usually in a perfect world, we kind of, when we're face to face, we assess the audience quick. And so I feel like we're going a little blind. Can't see everybody's faces, not sure the audience. So I'm just curious.
And my guess would be that we maybe have a mix of folks that are maybe very brand new to OER, just kind of starting out, gathering all the information and learning. Somebody replied, Michelle replied in the chat that she's using OER for her online math and math for liberal arts. So that's exciting. Deb says that she's always created her own materials, but didn't realize that they could be considered OER until the summit. So that's fantastic. One of the things that was mentioned in one of the previous sessions was being able to kind of uncover those things that faculty are doing already that maybe they aren't aware of in terms of OER. So content that you're already creating and that could easily morph into an OER product. And Abby says that she's using pieces of an OER text on communication in a life skills class she teaches in the correctional facilities and loving the activities that come with it. Absolutely. Someone else says they're here to learn, brand new to OER. So on our last question here, here's what I would pose. So assuming we do have a number of folks here that are just brand new to OER, what would be the one single piece of advice you would give them as they go through today and tomorrow, and they then go back to their institutions and think about OER?
I would say take a deep breath and just go slowly. Be curious,
I would say,
not afraid.
Yeah, I would say take one chapter and switch and go into the OER and just do one chapter, because you might feel comfortable doing the rest of the current book you have, but just get your feet wet doing one chapter and then see where you go.
And I would agree with both Amy and Michelle, starting slow. Don't feel that you just have to go all OER. Like Michelle said, just one chapter, pick a topic area. But I would also, my second piece of advice is going to be, you're not alone. So find, whether it's Rebecca here, whether you're reaching out to Buena Vista, don't feel that you're alone, because that's the biggest piece. I thought at first I'm in this on my own, and I found that we're a group, whether it's your college or other colleagues across the state of Iowa, you're not alone.
Echo everything. Absolutely. Yep, you aren't alone. And it can be a little overwhelming. Small steps, you don't have to jump right in and do a textbook. Find what works for you if this is something you're interested in, for sure. Well, thank you all very much. Thank you so much to our panelists. This was great. Loved the information. Loved hearing from the participants as well. And I think we'll end it there and finish up with another session, I think, starting at 3 o'clock.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you all. Enjoy.